Alright, so session 5 here. Before we do anything, I just wanted to show off the two assignments. So here's assignment 5.2. You'll see I've just created this pretty base HTML with a bunch of CSS that's been borrowed from Bootstrap. Kind of changed a little bit. And has a button with a modal. And down here I'm linking to use jQuery. And then the assignment code here, which is your job to write to match what mine is doing. Remember to always include jQuery before you try and use it. Just makes sense. Okay, so quickly here's 5.2, what it's meant to do. You have a button, it's the only thing that'll show up when you go and look at the page. And you want it to load like this. You have an X up here and a close down here. Both should be able to close. So all we're doing is opening a modal and then closing it down. So the CSS should all be there. All the stuff's there. You just need to show it and allow the close buttons to work to dismiss it. So that should be pretty straightforward one. 5.3, if we take a look at it here, what we've got is a list of different types of pops, and a filter box that will filter as you type. So if I type in Coke, as I put in the first letter, we're already filtering. And I added a little hint on this one that you're going to use a certain type of selector. And when you do it, it's going to be case sensitive. So if I type in Coke with a little c, it's not going to work, and that's fine. We just want to see, how this works for this. You can add in insensitive case searching later on. But if I were to type in Pepsi, we get these types of Pepsis. Clearing it out gives us the whole list again. So again, this is just the really default HTML that you're going to need to do that one. Linking here to the jQuery, and then to the assignment code, which is meant for you to write. So it's just an unordered list with a bunch of list items inside of it. So that was quickly just the assignments. The next thing here I want to go through a bit is I just got some test HTML. Just going to touch on a couple things that we've seen a little bit of, but people seem to have some questions with, and then some new things that we haven't seen using jQuery. So what I've got here is just another really basic HTML page. We've got a style which isn't applied to anything yet. We'll see that in the next video. I've got a container, 2 buttons here, and then some span with an ID of test, and it just has test inside of it. Again, linking to jQuery, I'm just using the Google one. And then here I have this script test.js, which I'll be going through. So you'll see on these buttons, we've got type, we've got ID, we've got name, we've got class, we've got this data test element, which is something I just made up. This first button is, an HTML button. It has, inner HTML. This second one is an input type of button. Input type, submit also works here, but we'll use button. It's got an ID, a name, a class, the data test, which is a little different. This one's Superman, this one's Batman, and then this one doesn't have inner HTML, it has a value, just so we can kind of see the differences there. And then we've got this span ID of test, which has some test stuff in it. So the first thing I wanted to look at here was using just vanilla JavaScript to select by ID. So we've seen this before. We've got a button, document.get element by ID button. So if I were to log what that means, and I were to refresh this page here, I've got the log down here. It's showing, hey, here's what I've got. I found this element is what we're referencing. When I hover it, it highlights it on the page to show me. We're talking directly about this HTML statement. So that's all fine and well. going to go on and do a little more with that. We can use this onClick handler to handle what happens when someone clicks on the button. And we're, again, highlighting. We're just showing that we're referencing this first button with the ID of btn. So what we want to happen is when someone clicks on it, it's going to be equal to this function alert button has been clicked. All right, so if I were to refresh the page, we've got that code in there now. We can tell because we're not consoling logging. So when I click this, you'll see alert button has been clicked. Cool. So that's how you can handle it in just vanilla JavaScript. Say we didn't want to do that. Say we wanted to not throw an alert, but we wanted to replace this HTML. We saw that this btn text was being generated here as an inner HTML element. So we're going to override this other onClick here. We're going to instead change the inner HTML to button has been clicked. So a quick refresh, click in here, we should see this btn change. And it did. So that's two things that got a lot of questions on: how to handle clicks, and then how to properly change the text. And we're changing it on this btn, which is set to this document.element by ID. So that is that so far. Let's move on here. Don't want to comment all of it. All right, so we've got the second button, button 2, which you'll know is here. It's this input type rather than the button type. And when it's clicked, I want to change the value. It doesn't have an inner HTML, so I want to change the value to button 2 has been clicked. So I'll come over here and I refresh. Button 2 has been clicked. Button still has that code on it, so both of them have these actions, when they're getting clicked. So that's just simply how to do some stuff in some really plain vanilla JavaScript. We're not using any libraries or anything like that. All right. So what happens if we want to do that same type of stuff when we get to jQuery? Well, we need to learn a little bit about jQuery before we do that. So jQuery, you assume you've seen it in the book and everything. Really, what it is when we talk about it is this selector. This is the big deal that comes with jQuery. You get other functions and things, but this is kind of the game changer that jQuery introduced. And what it is it's just this $sign, and the $sign is actually being used as a function within JavaScript. So what you're seeing it actually doing is it's actually calling a function called jQuery and passing whatever parameters you pass to this $sign function into this jQuery function, which then goes and finds these elements and returns it as a jQuery object. So what does that actually look like? Well, if we are to take something like I've cleared out my button. My button currently, if I were to run this, is nothing. So you should see test.js line 30 is printing nothing. Nothing is happening with it at the moment. But if I make it using jQuery, I say, hey, go and find an element by ID. So this is by ID, passing the pound, the same way that you do in CSS, and then the name. Call a hashtag now, I guess. Twitter's kind of changed this from a pound to hash. So if I again log this, it should tell me, okay, now we've got this other type of thing, and you'll note that it's not the same as what we logged when we logged originally. If I can add this back. When we originally logged, you'll see that we have this actual HTML element when using just vanilla JavaScript. Now when I hover this, it doesn't give me anything. It's an actual object, and it's got data associated with it. In fact, a ton of data. It tells you here, it's a proto-object. So with that said, we've created a jQuery object with this. We can get one based on class. Okay, we've still got a button. It's referencing it by class. We can reference it by name, which is a little different. You have to give the type of element that we're dealing with and then the name. So again, we've got it. Here it is. Selector using the name. So with that, we can do some cool things. Let's see here. But we're going to save that kind of for the second video in terms of what you can do with what you've got there. Before we go to that, I want to cover this document.ready.function. So previously, when we had code that we wanted to run at runtime, I told you, it's simple enough. Just include your code at the bottom of the body. And that's still the case. You still very much want to do that. However, with jQuery, it's introduced this document.ready function, which basically states that when the document itself has loaded within the DOM, when it's ready to go, then go ahead and run your code now. So if we were to test this, I've just got an alert in here. It says, anything in here is going to be called once the document's ready. Refresh the page. Okay, it throws up this. Once the document is ready, it throws up the alert. And there's a couple other types of states for when things can be called. And the reason to do it this way is just to know when things are going to be called, because your code can get really complex. So just a quick example here from another site that I've worked on in the past. We've got some code here where we've got this document.ready, and it's calling and doing what it needs to do once the document is ready. We also have another state up here of once the window is loaded, go and do this different stuff. So it's just to break down to state when you actually want the code to run. Another example here. So this is a gigantic project. You can see the amount of lines over there. It's about 7,000 within this single JS file. And it contains a bunch of models, which are classes within JavaScript. And we need to make sure that these things have loaded prior to trying to actually use them within JavaScript. So if we wait for the document to have properly loaded all this stuff before calling our code, then we can put it within this code wherever we want to, or include the file whenever we want to, as the case may be. Right now, this stuff is all very linear. It reads top to bottom. But if I wanted to use, for example, if here I wanted to use an object that was created in code lower on in the code, I wouldn't be able to do that unless I was waiting for this document to be ready and have loaded in all the things that it needs in order for this to run. So that said, there is actually a simpler way to call this function, which looks like this. It's just the $sign again, jQuery, and then rather than passing it a selector like we saw here, you just pass it a function. And once you pass the function, it assumes that it's waiting for the document to be ready before it'll call this thing. So if I go and I run this again and I refresh, you'll see that, again, this test alert pops once the document is ready. So that's the intro here to jQuery. We've seen this kind of selector. It's a variable. This is this $sign, but it's a method, which is why we use it with parentheses next to it. Which you might forget later on. It becomes kind of secondhand to just say dollar parentheses, and you kind of forget that you're actually calling a function when you're doing that, but you are. So that's the end of this intro. In the next video, we'll see kind of how to manipulate some of these jQuery objects that we're getting back, and what elements they have and methods they have.